you're very particular about how the paint appears before you apply it to the model, this is the perfect material to use. Hello, this is VJ from Hearns Hobbies, and today I'm going to be having a closer look at the new GodHand Adjusting Palette sheet. Now the Adjusting Palette sheet comes in this little packet here. It's basically a blotting paper made of very high quality paper stock. It's very white, it's pure white as you can see here, and it's got a little embossing of GodHand on the bottom here, which is a nice little touch. And I'm going to discuss what it is actually used for and the sort of purpose and idea behind this particular product. So let me just move that across here. I've got a loose one here which I've taken out of the packet. So as you can see here, very pure white. Just see the embossing here. Actually that's the wrong way around. You can read it from this angle here, hopefully. Probably see it from there. Now the idea behind this, you can see it's a reasonably thick weight card. It's basically used as a blotting paper, or it can be used as the top section of your wet palette. Okay, so let's just talk about the obvious ones first. Now, as blotting paper, quite often when you're painting, you'll use something for blotting off the excess paint off your brush. And quite often you just use a little bit of tissue, stuff like this. So this is just some hand towel. Now, this basically does the same thing, except being pure white, it allows you to actually see the tone of the color purely before you actually apply it onto your model. So a couple of examples. I've been using these before, so I've got examples here. Okay, this is where it's been used as the blotting. Okay, and as you can see, it's very clean coming off here. And this is where I've been using it as a wet palette. Okay, so with the blotting, let's give you a quick demonstration of what I mean by that. So let me move this. Now this is a regular wet palette which I've made, and I've got a tutorial on how you make these basic palettes. It's just a hand towel with some baking paper across the top. The hand towel's been wet so it remains moist, and then the wax paper separates that from the paint. Okay, so if I just put some paint here, like so. So usually you use some water for getting the consistency you want. Okay, so that's what I like here. Feels smooth coming off the brush. The thing is, the paintbrush is fully loaded now, and if I put that straight onto a model, it's going to go on pretty heavily. So just go over here and you remove the excess, and then you're left with just a light loading of paint on the brush. So that's basically how you use it as blotting paper. Basically the same way you would use this tissue I had before. So same thing, blot it off here. Okay, to start with, the advantage of this particular paper compared to your towel is you can see the pure white in color. Probably not a good example, I'm using black here. Black still looks like black on both colors. But with the towel here, it's actually a very coarse surface. So as you do this, with every wipe, you're actually being abrasive onto your brush. This one is smoother, so less chances of that problem. Okay, so that's the first use, just to blot and control the amount of paint on your brush. Second use, as blotting paper, I've got some here. Okay, so here's another sheet. Let me just remove this one, get this one out of the way. So this one here, I have used to blot Artist oil paints. Okay, so if you're not aware already, now Artist oil paints generally come in tubes like this, and oil paints are quite popular now for using on models by weathering, because as you put them on, after they've dried, you still have a lot of working time, and easier to manipulate. Okay, the The negative part of these is that all artists' oils are mixed with linseed oil, and the linseed oil basically allows it to, it extends its drying time. So if you were to put these on canvases, where basically you apply it thick, and you want to be able to work with the paint for long periods of time, blending and such. On models, you don't want that so much. You actually want it to dry fairly quickly. So what I've done here is I've applied 2 lots of the oil. You can see here how it's all spidering out. So this blotting paper is actually sucking the linseed oil out of the paint so that you're left with majority of paint base and pigment. Okay, so these have been sitting there for about half an hour and it's already drawn out quite a lot of liquid so that you can use the main part of the pigment, which is just sitting in the middle there. So just to give you an example, this is what it would have looked like when it comes straight out of the tube. Okay, so there's that one. And that one there. Okay, so if you didn't know any better, I think most people will start using these now. Problem is, you'll probably find that in a week's time or even 2 weeks' time, this particular paint with linseed oil in it will still be wet and it will still be coming off on your fingers. So hence why we use it here on this blotting paper, and it draws the oil out. Next again is because it's so pure white, once it's drawn out this oil, what you're left with is good representation of the pigment that you're going to be using. It's a lot easier to visualize on pure white than on any other color. Okay, so that's the blotting aspects of it being used. All right, so the second application for these is to use as a wet palette. Okay, so you can see these examples. I'll bring this across. Now this is the basic wet palette which I've shown you how to make with regular household materials. That's a kitchen paper with the baking paper. And here we have the GodHand version, which is the adjusting palette paper on the top, and on the bottom I have the GodHand absorbent paper, which is a bit hard to pick up at the moment because it's wet, but I'll see if I can pick up the top part so you can see it. Okay, so this is a woven material, which I've also described in another video. The great thing about this particular material compared to kitchen paper is it's non-bacterial. It also absorbs much more liquid, and it absorbs it to a point where it doesn't feel too wet. Okay, so being too wet, I mean that when you touch it, it doesn't pull up as much as, say, kitchen paper would on your fingers. Now, in conjunction with this particular paper, you see immediately how white the surface is compared to this one. It makes me wish I had another color like yellow, which would be much more noticeable when you've got it on these two. But I'll continue using the black because I only have the black. Now if I apply paint there, okay, and I'll point out the differences now. Okay, so when you're using a waxed paper type wet palette, what you might notice is it does wrinkle, so it's very hard to keep flat. And then the other thing is water pools on the top. So I don't know if you can really see that. I'll see if I can get some reflections around here. So it naturally pulls and it naturally keeps the paint wetter. So whether or not that's an advantage or a disadvantage is up to you. I think that's a personal choice. So you just have to be careful of the water pooling, because what that does is, as you mix it around, you could be diluting your paint more than you like. And the other thing too is when you've got the lid on, so when you put a lid on top of your wet palette, as it condensates and the water collects on the top and then drips back down, it will start pooling here, and when you come back to it, you could come back to very, very wet paint, which is unusable. Okay, so they're just some things to get used to. Feel is a little bit different. So this is smoother in touch. So it also has to do with how it feels with the paint coming off your brush, like so. Actually, as I'm doing this, you might see that this is actually pooling now. See that with all the water? Okay, so pooling means just making a little dollop of water that's just floating across the top here. Okay, so in some ways that's undesirable because there's less control. Difference with this particular one is on the touch, even with your finger, it's dry. Okay, although it's fully loaded with water at the moment. So what it does is it actually pulls the moisture from the surface, whereas this paper has the moisture sitting on the surface. Both work fine, you just have to play around with the differences there. So when you're using this one, this is actually going to feel drier as you use it. Okay, which is going to give you a bit more control. You can see as it's thinning out. So even when I'm applying excessive amounts, you'll see slight pulling now, but it's going to be absorbing it into the paper reasonably quickly. Okay, the feel also across the surface is a little bit rougher. And you actually use it for blotting at the same time. Okay, so this is actually controlling the amount of paint which is on the brush. And being a very pure white color, you can see all the different tones that are coming off this now. Like so. And you see how sharp the edges are? So if we did that on this one, you can see that it's, you can't really see what's happening because it's all pooling. Okay, and so that's how you use this particular product as a wet palette. So the feel is totally different. It does have advantages. And this one has its disadvantages. I mean, I've been using this system for a very, very long time. I'm fairly used to it, so I know these pitfalls here. With this one, the feel is different in that there's more control. And as you can see here, as we're controlling the amount of load of paint on the brush, it's so much more controlled. So that's your adjusting palette sheet there. Now I think that's a great plus. Now the other advantage is after you've finished using your palettes, some people like to keep the particular palette so they can keep an eye on their particular paint mixes. So if they want to use it again and they want to see how they achieve that, they keep these as an index. And with these being so perfectly white, you see these are perfectly dry now, and you see how rich these colors are. That's because they're on that perfectly white background, and it gives you a good idea of the intensity of these colors and also where it's semi-transparent, like on these blood tones here. So as indexing papers, they're perfect. Now if you were to keep this one as an indexing, it'll actually start cracking up on this particular paper because it's waxed and it's not designed to actually absorb the paint. This is actually in the surface. Okay, so this is the new GodHand adjusting palette sheet. As you can see, it can be used as a blotting paper, which is the example I showed on this one. So just for controlling how loaded up your paintbrush is. So you just wipe it across the surface and it absorbs the liquid very quickly. Okay, alternatively, also in the blotting mode, this is for pulling out the linseed oil from oils. And that's a very popular thing to do these days, to use artist oils for weathering. Okay, but pulling out the linseed oil helps the process quite a lot. And you see how these ones I put on just recently, these ones have been sitting here for over half an hour, so it's pulled a lot of the liquid out. These ones have been here about 5-10 minutes and it's starting to draw out that linseed oil now. Okay, second usage of course is using it as a wet palette. So it's basically the top sheet here. I've used it in combination with the other GodHand sheet on the bottom, but you could even use that with kitchen towel if you wanted to. Difference being is the feel of the wax paper compared to this particular palette adjusting sheet. Quite different. This one feels wet across the surface because of the anti-stick nature. This one is dry to the touch and actually pulls the moisture within the paper itself. So you can see the control that you can get through here, and also using it as blotting, and you can see exactly the density of the tone as you're adjusting it. So there we go. So this is the GodHand Adjusting Palette sheet right there. Comes in a little packet. There's 20 sheets per packet, and they may look small, but this sort of size I think is perfect for most users. Again, it's great for using as indexing once you're finished. And the other side, as you can see, it's quite thick. If you wanted to reuse these, you could. You'd probably use the other side just for blotting if you liked. Wouldn't particularly use this again for a wet palette because you'll have this color bleeding through the other side. So there we go. Use it for blotting or for your wet palette, and it's a great item. Nice little GodHand embossing there, nice touch. And these are available now. So if you're very particular about how the paint appears before you apply it to the model, this is the perfect material to use. This is the GodHand Adjusting Palette sheet. Thank you for watching.